Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 152. And just a little catch up on what's been going on. Swamp Thing has just united the Parliament of Trees and Parliament of Stones. So now he is like officially the champion of the Earth. And he has begun his next trial to integrate the Parliament of Waves into that. So if you haven't picked up on it already, basically Swamp Thing is going through these trials. And when he's done, he will kind of be the champion of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. So he already got earth. So now he has moved on to water. And this one has started off weird. Last time we were introduced to a young girl named Anna who had drowned herself in the swamp. But there's something supernatural going on because time itself has gone backwards. She was driven back from the morgue into the swamp, put back in the water, and she walked backwards out onto the bank and sat down under a tree and began to read from a book. And Swamp Thing just happened to be there and see this. So of course he's got to ask some questions. And it turns out that Anna is cursed and she has been reliving the same story over and over, which is actually from a book that she has written, and that's called River Run, and it's made up of a bunch of short stories. And the first one, which was called Flotsam and Jetsam, is actually part of the story we were seeing where a girl commits suicide and gets found in the swamp. There hasn't really been an explanation about why or how this is happening. All we know is that it is, and Swamp Thing has been asked by Anna to help break this cycle, and he's going to do that by going into each short story inside the book of River Run and fix the plot holes so they make more sense. Basically, it sounds like Anna just didn't have an editor, or at least a beta reader or something, to figure out how to make these stories wrap up and make sense. So Swamp Thing agreed, and that's pretty much where we left off on the last issue. So first things first, with issue 152, we got the cover. We see Swamp Thing smashing through a pane of glass. There's a newspaper headline in the middle that says City of the Dead, and below that is what looks like a private detective trying to save a woman from said Swamp Thing monster. And she is screaming, and he is brandishing his pistol. I should also say that this is a Brian Boland cover, so it looks fantastic. And also on the cover, we see it's written by Mark Miller, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And we turn to the first page, and we start off in New Orleans inside of a tattoo parlor. And there's a white man in a dress shirt and a loose tie, and he is wearing a fedora, and he is getting a tattoo on his forearm by a black man with dreads. And the white man getting the tattoo is saying, "So I looked up her skirt, and I almost lost my lunch. I swear to God, Felipe, it was the most disgusting thing I ever saw. This broad was crawling with maggots. I mean, teeming with them, you know? That's when she told me she'd been dead nearly 3 weeks. And Felipe, the tattoo artist, says, "Jesus, how come I never meet any interesting women?" Then we see what he's tattooing on the white man's forearm, and it's a woman in lingerie, and her body looks normal except she has a skull for a face. And kind of joking to what Felipe said about not meeting interesting women, the man getting the tattoo says, "Relax, pal. I saved you her phone number." And with that, the tattoo is finished, and Felipe wipes off the guy's arm, and Felipe says, "Okay, Harry, I'm finished with the arm. Another case closed." And then Harry looks down at the tattoo, and he says, "Not a bad likeness. She had a great ass for a zombie." And then Felipe asks, "Where am I going to illustrate your next case? Your skin's like a sketch pad, man. There's hardly an inch to spare." And as Harry puts on his jacket and adjusts his hat and lights a cigarette, he says, "Yeah, maybe it's nature's way of telling me to retire." And then he walks outside, and as he walks down the street, we see this is not a normal New Orleans. He is walking by a bunch of zombie people who are holding signs that say "homeless and dead, please help." There's also a strip club that says "necromagic, all nude, all dead, XXX action." So it seems like the living and the dead coexist in New Orleans in this story. And we also see on this page that this is called City of the Dead, Chapter 1 of River Run. And as we turn the page, we cut to the swamp, and we see 3 police officers getting out of a vehicle, and they're searching around the area. And one of them is the sheriff, and the other 2 are his deputies. So one of the deputies is saying, "It doesn't matter how hard they look, Sheriff. They're never going to find old Cooter alive. I had a feeling someone else would go missing tonight. This afternoon was filled with such strange omens. I just never expected victim number 9 to be Cooter." And then the sheriff notices that the deputy is fumbling around with something in his hands, and he says, "Well, what's that you got there, boy?" And the deputy replies, "Silver bullets, Sheriff. Some of the boys figure we got an outbreak of lycanthropy on our hands, what with the corpses found half-eaten and all. And the sheriff lights a pipe and says, "Oh, come on. Use your head, boy. There ain't even a full moon in the sky. Dream Division folks reckon we're up against some kind of half-assed simian monkey man here. My guess is they're right." But the sheriff is cut off by the scream of the other deputy who was behind them searching on his own. And the deputy he was talking to says, "It's Bobby, Sheriff." And the sheriff darts off saying, "Come on, boy, move your ass." But it seems like the deputy is scared because he says, "Yes, sir, I'm right behind you." Then we cut to Bobby, who's a little bit deeper in the swamp, and he says, "Ah, shit, I think I just found Cooter." And the sheriff yells, "Stay where you are, Bobby, we're coming." And as the sheriff walks up behind Bobby, Bobby says, "Christ, I think I'm going to be sick." And then he points his flashlight at what he's talking about, and we see there's a body in the swamp in front of him, and it's a man who's had his rib cage torn open. So as he flashes the light on that, the sheriff says, "Take it easy, son. It's only a dead body. The most natural thing in the world." Then the first deputy finally catches up, and he sees the dead body, and he says, "Poor old Cooter." And then he walks over to the dead body and inspects it and continues saying, "His heart is ripped out, just like the others. One more kill for the monkey man." And then the sheriff hears something and he begins to look around, and the other deputy, Bobby, asks, "Sheriff, what's wrong, sir?" And the sheriff answers ominously, "My God, I saw something. I just saw something watching us from the water." But we get a zoomed out panel that shows the swamp, and we don't see anything lurking in the bushes or anything. Then we turn the page and we cut to downtown New Orleans inside of a diner, and there's a red-headed woman talking to Harry, the man who was getting the tattoo earlier. And this woman looks very familiar. She looks exactly like Anna, the girl who wrote this story from the last issue. So she is also going to be in all of these stories as a character as well. And she's saying to Harry, "You've got to help me, Mr. Moon. My husband's been missing almost 6 weeks. I don't know where else to turn. You're my only hope." And Harry replies, "I'm sorry, lady. I'm a paranormal investigator. Missing persons and stuff like that send me to sleep." And then Anna lights a cigarette, and she seems kind of offended by his last statement, so she says, "Sorry if I'm boring you. I would appreciate a little more sensitivity." And then Harry lights a cigarette and says, "Hey, I'm a sensitive guy. I cried like a baby the day that prick shot Reagan." But Anna doesn't really acknowledge that, and she just continues saying, "This isn't just another missing persons case anyway. I want to talk about this new monster everybody's so excited about." And Harry replies, "I'm all ears, Anna. Go ahead." So Anna continues, "It's my husband, Mr. Moon. He murdered every one of those poor people." And Henry kind of perks up at this, and he gets a little smile on his face as he pours himself a drink, and he says, "Why don't you start at the beginning? It might make things a little clearer." And she continues, "Oh, God, it wasn't Martin's fault, not really. He got into a fight with a drunken warlock 6 months ago. I suppose that's when it all began. I'm not exactly sure what it was about. Baseball, I think? The warlock got real angry and put a curse on him, a devolving spell." And Harry chimes in sarcastically saying, "Sounds like a reasonable man. Can you remember the symptoms?" And Anna says, "It attacks the very essence of a person's humanity and reverses the evolutionary process at an alarming rate. Our witch doctor said it's pretty rare in America, much more common in Europe and North Africa." And Harry asks, "I don't suppose there's any known cure?" And very sadly, Anna says, "Do you really need to ask?" Then a waiter comes up, and this guy looks like he's way overdressed for a diner. He's got like a suit jacket on and a tie, and he says, "Your bill, sir." But Harry does not reach for it immediately. He actually looks over at Anna and says, I seem to be a little short of cash at the moment. I must have left my wallet at home. Could you settle this now and I'll pay you back later? I'll mail you a check." So Anna pulls out some money and she begins to count it, and she looks pretty disappointed as she says, "Don't worry about it." And as the waiter walks away, Harry says, "I hate this place. The service is terrible." But Anna changes the subject back to her husband and says, "You must find my husband, Mr. Moon, before he hurts any more people." And Harry asks, "Do you have any idea what stage he's reached?" And she replies, "I don't know for sure. The police are hunting some kind of ape man or monkey, but I'm sure he must have regressed further by now." And then Harry lights another cigarette and says, "Great. Sounds like I better pack my fishing rod." Then we cut back to the swamp, but not back where Cooter was found. This seems to be a new crime scene. And there's a bunch of people gathered around, and they're trying to get a look at what's going on. But the police have cordoned it off with crime scene tape. And standing behind it, we see 3 officers talking, and one of them says, "Did you hear about the hostage situation at Delaware Hospital? Sweet Jesus, it was a classic. A gang of vampires hold themselves up in the blood transfusion unit. They sucked the place dry, and no one could touch them until the sheriff arrived with a fire hose. The old guy blessed the hose as he flooded the joint and drowned the bastards in holy water. You should have seen the mess, man. They're going to be mopping up those perps for weeks. And one of the other deputies says, the old fella sure ain't lost his touch. And then the sheriff, who overheard him, says, you bet your ass, Pimlet. Now, what's all the commotion here? And Pimlet answers, some kids saw something in the marshes, Sheriff. A couple of them thought it might be a monster. And the sheriff asks, hoax call? And Pimlet replies, not exactly. I think you might be interested in what we found. And then he brings over a large glass jug and sets it down at the feet of the sheriff. And the sheriff says, Jesus Christ. And we turn the page and we get to see what's inside the jar. And it is the head of Swamp Thing. And it's just kind of floating in this liquid. And as the sheriff bends down to examine it, he says, now this really takes me back. I haven't seen an earth elemental since I was at the police academy. And Swamp Thing does not look like he's having a good time. And one of the deputies sees this and says, it's pretty scared, Sheriff. I don't think it expected us to be able to capture it. And at this, Swamp Thing actually begins to talk and he says, please, let me out. I have been sent to this world to help you. And then the sheriff very seriously says, Christ almighty, somebody get this guy a badge. Then we cut to a hotel and inside we can see that Harry and Anna are inside of a room and it seems they have just had sex. And Anna is saying, I don't get it, Harry. They say private detectives never get involved with their clients. And Harry, who's reading a book at the edge of the bed, says, I make an exception for clients with big tits. Now keep quiet, sweetheart. I'm trying to read. But Anna doesn't keep quiet and she asks, what are you reading anyway? Why don't you just come back to bed? And Harry answers, I'm trying to figure out how we can help your husband. Remember him? And as he's saying this, Anna is kind of seductively crawling over to him and she is naked. And she comes up behind him and puts her arms around his waist. We can't really see what her hands are doing, but it does seem suggestive. But Harry doesn't seem to notice, and he continues saying, it says here the effects of the curse can be slowed down by draining the life essence of others, but the spell itself is irreversible. I guess that explains the pile of dead bodies with their hearts sucked out. And Anna asks, so what do we do now? And Harry answers, I don't know. Keep our fingers crossed, I guess. And then Anna pulls herself up onto his back and begins kissing the tattoos on his neck. And she says, these tattoos are amazing. Does everyone really tell a story? And Harry answers, every case I ever solved, sweetheart. They're all there. And as she looks at them closer, she says, it's so weird. I feel like I'm reading someone's secret diaries. And Harry says, be my guest. My life's an open book. So she begins to explore more, and she pulls up his undershirt, and she asks, what's this one on your back? It looks like a lion or an eagle or something. But Harry doesn't like that she's looking at that one, even though he just told her that she could. So he stands up and kind of slaps her hand away and says, hey, get away from there. And I'm not sure exactly what this tattoo was supposed to signify, but it seems like both of them know what it is because she says, oh God, Harry, I'm sorry. I had no idea. And Harry replies, it's okay, sweetheart. It happened a long time ago. Let's change the subject, eh? But just then the phone rings, and as Harry reaches to answer it, Anna says, don't answer it, Harry. Come back to bed, and I'll play the Merry Widow again. But Harry picks it up and says, sorry, babe. My horoscope told me to expect a crucial call around this time. Might be important. And then he answers saying, Harry Moon speaking. And we can hear the person on the other end say, Harry, it's me. I'm calling from the police department, buddy. We just brought in an earth elemental, and I thought you might want to ask him a few questions. Then we cut to the police department, and we see Swamp Thing is still in the jar, and he's sitting in front of the sheriff on a table. And we don't hear Harry's response, but we do hear the sheriff say, yeah, he said he was here to help us sort things out. Then we cut back to the hotel room and Harry's saying, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And as he hangs up, Anna asks, what's the matter? Your wife on her way back home? And as Harry gets dressed, he snaps back, I hope not. She died in a car crash 15 years ago. And then Anna kind of feels sorry for saying that, so she says, oh shit, I'm sorry, Harry. I really didn't mean anything. And then Harry looks at her with a big smile and says, don't worry about it, sweetheart. I was the bastard who ripped out the brakes. Then we cut back to the swamp where more deputies are searching, I guess looking for this monster. And one of them is saying, this is a joke. We don't even know what we're looking for here. Eyewitness reports have been totally inconsistent. And the other deputy says, right, totally inconsistent. And as they sweep their flashlights across the swamp, they begin to separate. And the first deputy says, first they tell us to track down some kind of monkey man. Now they reckon it's some kind of big lizard thing. I mean, Jesus. What's a guy supposed to think? And as the first deputy is talking, the second deputy gets pulled underwater. And when his flashlight hits the water, The first deputy turns around and yells, "Carter?" And then he shines his flashlight where Carter should be, but there's nothing but some ripples in the surface of the water. And he says, "Are you trying to scare me to death? For God's sake, Carter, this isn't funny. Where are you?" And just as he says that, something pops out of the water. We don't see exactly what it is, but we do see the deputy look up like it's much taller than him. And also we see the bloody claw of the creature. And as the deputy looks up in terror, he says, "Oh, Christ." Then we cut to some other deputies who are searching elsewhere in the swamp, and they hear a very loud scream. Then we cut to the police station, and Harry and the sheriff are talking to each other, and they're sitting in front of a table that has the glass jug that is holding Swamp Thing on it. And the sheriff is saying, "A devolving spell. Are you sure, Harry?" And Harry replies, "Of course I'm sure, you dickhead. I might not carry a badge anymore, but I still carry a brain." And the sheriff replies, "Hey, come on, take it easy. No offense intended." Then Harry stands up and he walks over to the jug and he looks Swamp Thing right in the eyes and he says, "This little shit should have been here weeks ago. I tried to invoke him for an elemental divorce case I was on, but he stood me up. Better late than never, I suppose." Then Harry calls to one of the deputies and he points to a plant on the window and says, "Make yourself useful, boy. Go get me that tasteless plant over there." And the sheriff asks, "What are you doing, Harry? You going to set him free?" And as Harry answers saying, "Yeah, why not?" He pulls the cork on the jug, and this green mist comes out of it, which is Swamp Thing, of course, and it jumps into the plant that the deputy is holding. And Swamp Thing is able to grow his body out of that plant. And of course, the deputy holding the plant is very surprised, and he says, "Huh? What in the name of Christ?" And he drops it, and then the three of them stare and watch as Swamp Thing builds his body. And the deputy asks, "How the hell did he do that?" And Harry replies, "He's an elemental, isn't he? Now start talking, pal. Who sent you here? Where can we find the devolving man?" And Swamp Thing replies, "I was sent here so that I might resolve a complex situation, but I know nothing of this creature you seek. Only what little I heard as I lay trapped at the bottom of the gas jar." And Harry's not very happy to hear this, and he says sarcastically, "Great. So much for that idea." And just then, another deputy runs in and says, "We found the monster, Sheriff. Some of the boys got it surrounded down by Milligan's Creek." And the sheriff replies, "Good work, Bobby. About time we had a little luck on our side." Then as the sheriff and Harry run out of the building, the sheriff yells back to the deputy that's still standing in front of Swamp Thing and says, "Keep an eye on the elemental till we get back, boy. Don't let him out of your sight." And it's kind of funny because Swamp Thing is about 2 feet taller than this guy and way buffer. So the deputy shouts back, "Wait a minute, Sheriff. How am I supposed to do that?" And the sheriff yells back, "You're a cop, boy. Use your head." And the deputy tentatively says, Right." And then he looks up at Swamp Thing, and trying to have authority, he says, "You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an exorcist. You have the right to..." But he's cut off as Swamp Thing goes into the green and travels to wherever the sheriff is going. And the deputy is left standing there in front of a pile of leftover plant matter, and he says, "Hey, wait! Come back here!" And then he realizes there's nothing he can do, and he says, "Ah, shit." Then we cut to Swamp Thing, who grows himself a body in the middle of the swamp, and I'm assuming close to Mulligan's Crossing, which is where the monster is supposed to be. So as Swamp Thing looks around, his narration says, "This shadow world I have entered is dark and unpleasant, a warped reflection of the good and decent earth I left behind. I do not think I like it here at all. The sun does not shine in this godless place, and it is clear that nothing good grows in this world's eternal shade. I would not have come here through the green were it not for Anna's strange request, her belief that I am the inspiration missing from her work and the solution to her unusual problem. A pungent scent drifts through the trees, and I forget, for a moment, that the atmosphere around me is unreal, an unfinished chapter in an unpublished book, and yet horrifying all the same." So as Swamp Thing's walking around, he comes upon the bodies of 2 deputies. We're assuming that these are the ones that called into the police station telling the sheriff that they had the monster cornered. And just as Swamp Thing comes upon them, we see a police car pull up, and Harry, the sheriff, and another deputy get out. And Harry sees Swamp Thing and says, "Hey, asswipe, what are you doing here? I told you not to get in the way." Then he walks down towards Swamp Thing, and as he gets in the water, his suit begins to get wet, and he says, "Shit, now look what you made me do. This suit is real Italian. It costs $600. And as he gets in front of Swamp Thing says, I am sorry. It was not my intention to interfere. I thought I might be able to help. And Harry looks at him right in the eyes and kind of angrily says, sure you can, big guy. Now piss off. Then he chambers around in his handgun and says, this son of a bitch plays for keeps. And Swamp Thing, still trying to be nice and reasonable, says, I understand your professional sense of pride, Harry Moon. I will not stand in your way. And just then, the monster appears from the darkness and rushes at them, and it is now devolved into a fish person. But a fish with like really sharp teeth, and it looks scary and big, and it's got claws. And for all his big talk and bravado, the second that Harry puts his eyes on the fish monster, he says, forget it, he's yours. No way I'm messing with that bastard. And then he begins to walk away from Swamp Thing, and Swamp Thing says, wait, what are you doing? And without even turning around, Harry just keeps walking and says, I'm out of my league here, pal. You can handle this on your own. And Swamp Thing is very surprised by this, and he says, what? Are you serious? But Swamp Thing can hear the fish monster getting closer, so he turns around and gets ready to fight, and the fish monster attacks, and it's able to rip Swamp Thing's body nearly in half with one swipe of its claws. But we do get some narration over these panels because Harry is telling this to his tattoo artist after the fact. So we hear Harry say, and Felipe, I'm telling you, you'll never guess what happened next. The elemental was down, and everybody stood around like spare pricks at a wedding. Thank Christ the sheriff was quick on the draw. Then we see the sheriff pull out his gun, and he yells to his other deputies, get behind me, boys, I'll handle this. And he begins firing at the fish monster, and we can see as he's doing this, in the background behind the sheriff, Harry is peeking out so he can see what's going on as he hides behind the car. And his narration says, I did what I could to help, but I was no use. The bastard just couldn't be stopped. One heavy swipe and it was all over. And we see the bullets don't really do anything to the fish monster, so it was able to rush up to the sheriff and swipe at his face. And we're seeing this from behind, so we don't see what the damage really is on his face. We just see blood coming from the swipe. And Harry's narration continues. It was like someone unzippered his face, and everything came pouring out. The cops took off like 747s. I don't know what we would have done if the elemental hadn't resurfaced. And as the fish monster stands over the body of the dead sheriff, Swamp Thing grows himself a body, and he says, this is stupid. Why do you fight the inevitable? This is why you are in so much pain. Then the fish monster reels around at the voice, and Harry's narration says, the devolving man stood sideways and sized him up. You know, just like a fish would do. And Swamp Thing continues to say, shed your humanity as I have. Allow nature to take its course. There is so much to look forward to. So many wonders lie ahead. And it seems like the fish monster is hearing this a little bit because he hasn't attacked. He just kind of stares at Swamp Thing like he's trying to think. And Harry's narration says, I gotta hand it to the big guy. He struck pay dirt. The creature stopped dead in its tracks. However, what came next was icing on the cake. Then we see another police car pull up, and Anna gets out of it, and she looks at the fish monster and says, Martin, is that you? And as it hears her voice, the fish monster turns to look at her, and Harry's narration says, the monster turned around slowly, a flicker of recognition in its eyes. The timing was perfect, and Anna keeps talking to the fish monster, saying, you can't keep hurting people, Martin. The killing has to stop. Oh, Jesus, honey. It's time to let go. And then the fish monster turns and walks towards her, and when it reaches her, it holds its claw up to her face like it's trying to touch her cheek and maybe wipe away her tears because she is crying, and she says, please, Martin, there's no other way. Please, do it for me. And as she says this, we can see that the deputies and Harry are standing on the shore just watching this in disbelief that the fish monster is even listening to her. And as Harry lights a cigarette, his narration says, I would have been touched if she hadn't given me a blowjob a few hours earlier, but it seemed to do the trick. I always knew that deputy would use his head in the end. Then we see a panel of the fish man just walking away from everybody, back into the water, and Harry's narration says, the devolving man slipped back into the water and was never seen again. Then we cut to present day where Harry is telling this story to the tattoo artist from the beginning. And from outside of the tattoo parlor, we hear Felipe the tattoo artist say, unbelievable. So what happened to the elemental? Did he stick around or what? Then we cut to the inside where we see Felipe is tattooing one of the cheeks of Harry's ass. And that's because that is the last clear area of skin on Harry's body. And the position of Harry as he's getting this tattoo is pretty hilarious. He's on his knees, leaning against a table, and reading a magazine called Jugs, which has a topless woman on the cover, and his pants are pulled down to his knees, and Felipe, the tattoo artist, is directly behind Harry. He's not standing off to the side, so he's having to look directly at Harry's ass as he gives the tattoo. And in answer to Felipe's question about what happened to Swamp Thing, he says, "He shook my hand and sunk back into the ground. Strange fella, kind of otherworldly. Anna had the strangest feeling she'd met him before, but didn't know where." And then Felipe asks, "What happened to her? I heard a rumor you got her pregnant." And then Harry looks back at Felipe with a smile on his face and says, "Don't worry, I did the honorable thing. I paid for the abortion." Then Felipe finishes his tattoo and says, "There, another masterpiece." And we can see the image tattooed on Harry's ass is of the face of the fish monster. And as Harry eyes it in a mirror behind him, he says, "Nice job, Felipe. The check's in the mail as usual." And Felipe lights a cigarette and says, "Wait a minute, Harry. What about this devolving man? How does this case all end for him?" And as Harry pulls up his pants and zips his zipper, he says, "Jesus, I don't know. Who gives a shit anyway?" Then we cut to the black waters of the swamp where the fish monster is just floating in darkness. And the narration says, "Once he accepted his fate, it was not an unpleasant experience. The pain had come from fighting the tide of change. He closed his eyes and drifted back into a coalescent state, his flesh breaking apart like soft soap suds. There was a brief sense of deja vu, then he moved on. As he passed through the protozoan stage, he lost all sense of ego as we understand it, slipping back further to the level of archaeobacteria, the most basic form of life on the earth. 1 billion years away from humanity, he began to tremble with a sudden and terrifying fear of extinction. He had reached the Big Bang, the very beginning of planetary evolution. And then he began a journey that would never end." So in these panels, we're seeing the fish monster's body come apart, like it said, in little particles. And then those particles devolve even more until at the moment where it said Big Bang, and then there's just blackness. And then it devolves even more, and we see a swirl of something begin to form, which I guess is happening before the Big Bang. So whatever he's devolving to, maybe he's actually evolving into something new. But we will never know, because that is the end of the story and the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.